Hey, my poker friends, welcome to another episode of the Poker Breakdown, where we help simplify the game of poker for you so you can level up your game on a daily basis. My name is Rob Gardner, and we have another fun hand today titled No Risk It, No Biscuit. Let's hop into the action. Okay, so full disclosure, the person that sent this hand history over only told us that they had Queen 10 offsuit, did not mention what the actual suits are. It does matter a little bit, but we're just gonna go with the assumption that it was Queen of Hearts, 10 of clubs for the sake of this video. This hand history comes from an $8.80 PKO on ACR Poker. Our opponent does elect to open under the gun six-handed. If we take a look in Range Trainer Pro, we can see that Queen 10 offsuit is a partial open. In PKOs specifically, one thing you'll want to do is open a little bit wider when you cover more players and open a bit more conservatively when more players cover you. And that's just because the bounty equity impacts how many hands we want to play and how much value there is to winning hands. It folds around to the big blind who does defend. The flop comes King of Clubs, 7 of Clubs, 2 of Spades. And this is where we have to talk about playing versus the big blind. One of the most common post-flop spots you'll be in is playing versus the big blind. So studying it and understanding it is really, really important to your post-flop game. So this is the standard big blind defend range, and I want to give you a couple points to keep in the back of your mind when you're up against the big blind. The first is that this range is really, really wide. We are not folding any two suited cards, we're not folding any pocket pair, and on the offside side of the board, all of the offsuit connectors, all the way down to King 6 offsuit, any ace offsuit, are all calling. This really wide range makes it less likely that our opponent has a hand like top pair or middle pair because of how many hands they have in their overall range, which means in general, their range interaction is going to be weaker. The second thing I want to point out is look at the 3-bets. Notice that our opponent 3-bets a lot of ace X, some king X, even some queen X, some 10X and jack X, and all of the pocket pairs, aces, kings, queens, jacks, 10s. This is important because when the board comes ace high, king high, queen high, jack high, 10 high, we have a range advantage and a nut advantage because when our opponent just called, a decent amount of their hands that contain these cards are no longer in their range. On the flip side, our opponent has a lot of suited cards and even some off-suited cards in the 8, 7, 6, 5 range, which means when the board comes 8 high, 7 high, 6 high, 5 high, our opponent now has a bit of a range advantage because they have more hands that interact with these 8 high, 7 high, 6 high, 5 high boards than we do. So as a general rule of thumb, anytime you get these Broadway high boards, like in this spot where we have the King of Clubs on the board, we get to confidently make a C-bet regardless of what our hand is. Now the question is, what sizing should we bet? If you've ever looked at a solver output, you know that some of them can be really intimidating, but I have great news today. This is really easy. We're basically just going to use a small bet here the majority of the time. One of the things you can remember is in situations where we have a lot of range advantage, we just don't need to put a lot of chips in the pot. Our best hands are way better than our opponent's best hands, so they can't call large sizings when we have value. And when we have bluffs, remember what we talked about with they having a really big range and missing the board a lot of the time, we don't have to bet very much to get most of their range to fold. So this should just be a small bet. As played, hero makes a 2/3 pot size bet and gets called. The turn is a 3 of diamonds, which is basically a blank. Villain checks, we check behind, and now the river is a 5 of hearts, and villain elects to lead out at just over half pot. Now, while we don't go super GTO heavy on this channel, there are still times where looking at the solver and seeing what our opponent's supposed to do really helps us because then we can differentiate between a perfect world and what actually happens in real life. And that difference can kind of push us in one direction or another in terms of how we can apply our strategy to our actual opponents in an actual real life situation. So stay with me now. I know this can be a little bit intimidating, but check this out. This is actually going to be really cool. Our opponent made a big bet, so we're going to click the 67% pot bet here and kind of look at what our opponent is supposed to be betting here. And if you look at this, it's pretty stunning. If you look at their best hands, this is where I like to go first. Like, what are the best hands they're betting? they're betting some of their top pairs, but not a whole lot. And the reason for this is our opponent really wants to be able to happily check call and not get raised off of their top pair hands. So they're actually not doing a ton of betting with their top pair hands, and they're actually doing a fair amount of bluffing. Queen 10 bluffs, Queen 9, Queen 8, Jack 9. All of these hands are bluffing. Now, in real life, most of our opponents aren't going to turn these hands into bluffs. They're going to be kind of more focused on their weaker value hands. But if you notice, they never really have a set of sevens here. They never really have a set of twos here. They never have kings here. They really never have threes or fives because of the sizing we used on the flop. And they really don't have much in the way of two pair combos. The only two pair combo they have is basically king 7. And it's actually checking back too because, again, it wants to either call or raise. So what can we take out of this? Well, we have queen high in this situation. So the only way we're winning this hand is to turn our hand into a bluff or to just give up and fold. The takeaway from what we saw in the solver is that our opponent's range is very capped, which means that they're limited to only mediocre value hands. They don't have the best hands possible here. Even if we assume that their few value hands like king 7, king deuce, and ace 4 that picks up a straight on the river just pure bet the flop instead of checking to go for a check raise, we're still looking at a range that is predominantly a bunch of random stab bluffs and a lot of weak top pairs. And the cool thing is, the strongest top pair that they have here is king queen, and guess what we have in our hand? A queen and a 10, which makes it way less likely that they have king queen and way less likely that they have king 10, two of the hands they're most likely to bet here for value. So let me talk to you aggression junkies here for just a minute. Some of you just love to try and run your opponents over and bluff every chance you get. And if you would just dial your aggression down just an itty little bit and be a little bit more selective, you would have more success. The key to being aggressive is finding spots where our opponent's line is very capped and their ability to defend when we attack them is very, very weak. So if we look at the situation where we raise this bet and turn our hand into a bluff, we just want to see what our opponent is supposed to call and what they would actually call. And we can see that their bluff catchers include pretty much almost all of the king X on the offsuit and suited side, folding at very small frequencies, and even a little bit of pocket jacks and pocket 10s and pocket 9s. And the reality is, we're probably pretty confident if we raise large enough, a lot of these hands are just going to fold. Now, if you're up against a calling station who never ever folds, then this is going to be lighting money on fire. So make sure you're taking good notes and you have a good idea of which opponents just never fold top pair no matter what, and which ones can actually lay down a very weak hand. Our hero does elect to raise. I would have liked to see a little bit bigger sizing here. I think this sizing kind of keeps kings priced in. I think we need to go closer to like 24, 25, 2600 to really get a lot of that weaker king X to fold. But our opponent does end up making the fold, and we do not get to see what they have. All in all, this was a little bit deeper and headier spot than we've gone through in the first 4 episodes, but I think it's really important to kind of see how over the course of a flop and a turn and a river, you can kind of deduce that your opponent doesn't have a lot of 2-pair or better hands. They have a lot of weaker hands, and those are spots we can exploitatively attack against players who are not comfortable making very loose calls. Hope you got a lot out of this. As always, hit that like and subscribe button, hop in the comments, tell us how you would play this hand, and make sure you're following me on all the socials. They're down in the description below. If you're interested in private coaching, or maybe you want your hand to be featured here on the Poker Breakdown, my contact info is down there. You can shoot me an email, you can shoot me a DM on Twitter. We would love to interact with you. Thank you again, and until next time, keep crushing on the tables.